Let's just imagine for a second a single, incredibly elegant mathematical framework. And what if I told you that this framework, which is written entirely in Lean 4 code, can model literally everything? I mean, we're talking about the collisions of subatomic particles, the faint cosmic background noise of the universe, but also deeply fundamentally human experiences. Things like the overwhelming cascading feeling of anxiety in your mind, or how a community actually supports its members. So in today's explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how this code maps our reality. We'll be moving from the deeply personal all the way out to the mind-bendingly cosmic. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our map for today's wild journey. We'll start by modeling the anxious mind. Then we'll move on to equations of community support, calculating composite particles, the cosmic background noise, and finally, proving ancient truths.
Part 1. Modeling the anxious mind. The frequencies of fear.
Before we look out at the stars or zoom in on subatomic quarks, let's start with a human-first approach and see how this mathematical code maps something we're all intimately familiar with, the human mind. The code actually reframes anxiety purely in acoustic and mathematical terms. It defines it as cascading destructive interference. Imagine multiple competing threat detection frequencies firing off in your brain all at once, and none of them can quite achieve a stable closure. It's essentially like a stuck radio dial, right? Just bouncing rapidly between stations. Your mind is racing, flipping from threat to threat, but never actually settling on one dominant frequency.
To really get a grip on this, let's contrast it with trauma. Now, while anxiety is mathematically defined as this cascade of unresolved oscillating patterns that block your mind from normal resting, trauma is modeled completely differently. It's seen as a single, locked wave pattern. By essentially turning psychology into physics, the code perfectly illustrates why anxiety feels like this perpetual, exhausting oscillation. The re-excitation just keeps happening, so the mind literally can't rest. So what's the mathematical resolution to this anxiety cascade? Well, the code provides a mathematical proof for healing anxiety that totally mirrors what we know as exposure therapy. Step 1, you isolate the threat pattern. Step 2, you force consolidation. And Step 3, you allow for normal damping, or decay. By forcing multiple vague, bouncing threats into one single consolidated pattern, basically standing your ground and saying, I see this fear and it doesn't break me, the code proves that the brain can finally damp that signal naturally. It even maps out exactly 10 therapy cycles to bring the decay rate back down to a manageable, healthy baseline. How cool is that?
Moving on to Part 2, Equations of Community Support, the Mathematics of Belonging.
Zooming out slightly to the sociological scale, we can examine what the code calls the assimilation deficit. Now, keeping things purely objective and focused on the variables here, the community dominance model starts with a signed integration burden. That's essentially the mathematical weight or difficulty an individual faces when trying to integrate into a new environment. But here's where it gets interesting. When the code introduces community support as a variable, what happens? It simply subtracts a fixed mathematical unit. The theorem formally proves that this results in a strictly lowered assimilation deficit. It's absolutely fascinating to see a warm, highly social phenomenon, perfectly described by a simple, rigid mathematical reduction.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because we're about to make a pretty dramatic pivot in Section 3. Calculating composite particles, the quantum pivot. The exact same foundational logic we just saw dictating human behavior now dictates the physics of subatomic quarks.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the Lean 4 code maps composite particles as pure collision events. A meson is literally just a quark and an antiquark colliding. The theorems prove that the composite particle's total energy score is exactly the sum of its constituent scores. It is wonderfully simple, just like 4 plus 4 equals 8.
Let's walk cleanly through this data translation. A pion, which is a meson made of a quark and an antiquark, scores an 8. But look at the proton and the neutron. Even though they have slightly different phase distributions in the code, they both consist of 3 quarks. And when you sum up their constituent scores, 3 light quarks at a score of 4 each, they both identically map to a mathematical score of exactly 12. In the underlying geometry of the code, they sit precisely at what is called the dodecagon wall, with that score of 12.
Which brings us to Section 4, the cosmic background noise, scaling to the universe.
We've gone from the human mind to society, straight down to the quantum scale. Now we're expanding out to the absolute largest scale possible, the cosmic microwave background of the entire universe. So the crucial point is 12. Let's just pause and let that sink in for a second.
We just saw protons and neutrons hit the dodeca wall at 12. Out here on the massive cosmic scale, the code defines 12 as the eon constant. The huge universal concept of cosmic background noise hangs entirely on this single fundamental number.
Let's see how that plays out mathematically. The universe has a background temperature of approximately 2.73 Kelvin. The code maps this out in an astonishingly deterministic way. When you scale that temperature up to 273 and multiply it by the framework's fundamental scaling factor of 44, you get 12,012. This perfectly equals the scaled aeon constant of 1200 times 10, plus our fundamental number, 12. To put that into perspective, the exact temperature of the vast cosmos scales perfectly back to that exact same constant. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Finally, Section 5. Proving Ancient Truths, Code as Philosophy.
We are now transitioning into the final philosophical meta layer of this explainer. We're going to treat this lean code almost like it's an ancient text being progressively decoded. The code actually imports ancient Indian tradition to formalize a proof. Consider this profound quote from the Rig Veda. Truth is one, the wise call it by many names. The code contains a formal mathematical proof called Truth One Many Names Witness. It mathematically certifies that if you have many local names or distinct traditions and they all achieve agreement, they must inevitably converge on a single, unique truth carrier.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the code takes a famous thought experiment and completely reinterprets it. What we are looking at is the raw logic, the actual structural architecture ensuring that deep order, or what the code refers to as gnosis, isn't just some random occurrence, it's an absolute inevitability. I'm sure you've heard of the monkey typewriter theorem, right? The idea is that a monkey hitting keys at random for infinity will eventually type out Shakespeare, or, at least a very, very long typo. But the code asks a different question. What happens if you rig the typewriter? In this specific mathematical model, the keys only support a specific set of inputs called the gnosis basis. The formal proof shows that if an agent produces an integrated sequence on this rigged machine, it literally must be the gnosis basis. It shows that if the underlying physics are rigged by these rules, the emergence of ultimate order isn't just a statistical stroke of luck. No, it is mathematically inevitable.
Which brings us to our final grand thought. We've seen how destructive interference explains our personal, human anxiety. We've seen how simple mathematical subtraction models community support. We've literally added numbers to build protons, and we've scaled the number 12 all the way up to measure the cosmic microwave background of the entire universe. We've even mathematically proven that many names point to one singular truth. So if everything from our most private internal anxieties to the absolute outer edges of our universe is built on the exact same elegant, inevitable code, what are we? Are we just the code executing itself? It is a profound mystery, and definitely one that leaves us with so much more to learn. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the code of our reality.